Hello, everyone. Welcome to our representation roundtable for Agents of Change. I am CJ. I am joined today with a lot of my great friends, Aisha, Emma, Ryan, and Brandon. How are you guys doing today?
We are good, ready to get
We're
into
good.
this.
So
Well,
ready.
well, it's a very important topic, and the idea of this presentation is rethinking the idea of a gaze, a different viewpoint. How do we look at things differently? From what direction, from what influences us from the time we were born to how we are today? How do we look at things certainly? And a lot of that falls into the ideas of representation in media. How do we look at a lot of this stuff? And the ideas of representation versus inclusion. Obviously, there's a difference between the two. Representation to me means you're putting a character on the screen and they're giving the chance to tell their story based on their heritage or what makes them different from the rest. Inclusion for me is different. It's a start, but it's not enough. It's putting a character in a movie simply to be gay or to be black or to be Muslim. All of these different ideas that they are just there for. So I wanted to get into a couple of ideas of good representation and things we have seen. Emma, I'll start with you because you just recently watched Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So how do you feel about that?
I did. So, one of the things I just wrote a review on the final season without getting into spoilers for that. One of the things I love about the show is just kind of how unapologetically Jewish it is. And me being Jewish, growing up Jewish, my entire family heritage, my parents are both Jewish, so everyone down the line pretty much. It's just really important, and it was really cool to see a show that just kind of like portrays Jewish people as like not incidentally Jewish. There's a lot of shows and movies that I watched growing up where a Jewish character would just kind of have like an offhand remark that they were celebrating Hanukkah, or it was just like a very very stereotypical portrayal of a Jewish person. But this show shows the family going to synagogue, celebrating holidays that are not very well known, like Yom Kippur. And it's just very important to me to see that kind of representation and Jewish people in like a positive light, because a lot of the time they are cast as a villain and kind of portray anti-Semitic tropes. So Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, in my opinion, did a great job with the Jewish representation.
And I feel like it's coming at a really good time because obviously right now in media, and I'm not going to get into specifics of why or how, anti-Semitism is pretty bad right now. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of it. I see a lot of it. It's led by certain people who don't deserve to have their name dropped on here, but it's bad. So seeing projects like this are super good. And from your vantage point, obviously your gaze, it's more important to you than it could ever be to any of us. Which is why I want to get into the next topic a little bit too, is representation in superhero media. We've seen this a lot more through the MCU. Specifically has done a really good job at it, and especially in more recent years. At the beginning, it wasn't always great, but throughout like the past, I'd say 5-6 years of it, it's done a really good job. So Aisha, I'll go to you. What's a character that you see in superhero media that you think does a really good job at portraying representation to you?
I feel like for me, as a South Asian person, I think Miss Marvel has been like the biggest when it comes to that. It's trying to get the words. Yeah, it's so important. Like for me, growing up, I've never seen someone or a character that looked like me. And seeing Kamala Khan, played by Iman Vellani, who's also a Canadian like myself, and brown, and it's so impactful in that way, I guess.
No, yeah. And I think Kamala Khan's a really important one too, because even outside of the Muslim and South Asian heritage that she brings to the screen, she also brings a different vantage point for a female viewpoint. And I know I'm obviously a white male. I can't comment to most of the struggles you guys go through, but especially in superhero genres, like women are very sexualized. Like if you look at Scarlett Johansson's introduction as Black Widow to the MCU, it's very sexualized, especially in the first and second Avengers movies. She's a very sexual driven character, which is not how like she was groundbreaking in terms of she's a strong female character who can hang with the guys, which is great. But she's also extremely sexualized. So seeing characters like Kamala Khan who aren't at all, or like even I would say Elizabeth Olsen in WandaVision isn't very sexualized. So seeing more and more female characters like that are important too. Emma, what do you think about like female representation as of late?
Yeah, I think what they're doing on a systemic level is changing a lot, and I truly appreciate kind of like the inclusion. One thing I also really appreciate is just kind of behind the scenes as well. Because when Elizabeth Olsen kind of made her debut in Age of Ultron, her costume was very revealing, and she even spoke out, I believe, about kind of how she didn't appreciate that costume in particular. But now seeing her in WandaVision, like the costume just makes sense, and I think that's like one of the little things that people, most men probably don't think about, is like the clothes that they're wearing. Like if you're a superhero, if I was a superhero and I was moving around all the time and doing flips and stuff like that, like my hair would be up, my entire body would be covered, like I would be wearing like the most comfortable clothes. But so like back in the day, they're showing these female superheroes that are like wearing these revealing costumes, and they just look so uncomfortable, and I'm like, that's clearly done to sexualize them. And I think kind of making it a little bit better, I think they've been doing a really good job recently with making it make more sense for female superheroes. Like it just has been so much better lately, and we still have a long ways to go in fandoms, but I think behind the scenes they're doing a much better job.
And that just made me think of a line from the Black Widow movie where Yelena's talking about the pockets in her pants. And that's like
Exactly.
something I would never think of. But like I heard so many girls and women after that movie came out being like, that was the most relatable thing I've ever heard in a movie. And so
So true.
obviously from like your guys' gaze, that's something very important and like meaningful when you see stuff like that on screen. And another character that we've seen a lot of get so much attention, and rightfully so, is T'Challa, Black Panther. Of course, with Chadwick Boseman leading the role, now Letitia Wright in the role. Brandon, I'll pass to you. What does Black Panther mean to your community?
For me, it means everything. You know, for a very long time, Black characters, and specifically if you look at African heritage, was always portrayed as a bit of a joke or as something that um, it was just always a source of comedy rather than something that was portrayed as something that we should be proud of. And in terms of Black Panther, one of the reasons why it's so revolutionary is that it portrays an Africa that never was, because we know the history of colonialism on the continent. We know what happened. And Black Panther essentially shows an African country that was never colonized, and an African country that was able to realize itself for itself and shape its own history. And then when you look at a character like T'Challa, he was a representation of a Black male character who was strong and smart and had integrity and was a strong leader. And if we look back at representations of Black men in media throughout the years, it's usually he's the gangster or he's the drug dealer or he's not very intelligent or something along those lines. And Black Panther was something that took all of these different stereotypes about Black people and basically did away with every single one of them. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because you have Brian Coogler writing and directing, and you've got this entire team of Black creatives making sure that they tell these stories in an authentic way. And even if they're not necessarily from from the continent of Africa, like you look at somebody like Ruth Carter, who designed all of the wardrobe, and Hannah Beachler, who's the set designer. They just made sure that Africa was represented in such a positive light. And for me, I've never seen that before. I think the closest I had ever come to something like that was maybe Coming to America. But other than that, like that was the only real positive representation, and it it just blew my mind because it was like I can't believe that they're letting this be on screen, and I can't believe, and it's Disney of all people. It's Disney and Marvel, and they're the ones spearheading this and putting this in the forefront for everybody. And now everybody wants to be from Wakanda. Like, it's this the cool thing. Everybody wants to be from that nation, and and it means the world to me, and I know it means the world to so many other Black people who haven't been seen in media before.
Absolutely. You said that beautifully. I don't know if anyone else could have said that better than you. That was awesome. But you talked about importance, and obviously, when you see a role like this, like Chadwick did for T'Challa, obviously you know it's going to make an impact, and you got to embrace it. And he embraced it beautifully. I feel like he is almost at the top of the list of greatest humans to ever live. Honestly, his name's gonna die with Hollywood if Hollywood ever dies. Like, he is synonymous with this franchise, will always be, and his importance to everyone outside of it is forever. And we see that as a theme amongst all representation, that actors take a role that's a big representation, and it doesn't like define them in a bad way like some things do. It defines them in a way that gives them a legacy to build off of. So Ryan, I want to ask you: is there anyone who sticks out, like along the lines of Chadwick Boseman, of stepping into a role of representation and really making it their own and leaving a legacy for viewers?
Um, so I mean, just keeping it on the Marvel side of things, I think one of the bigger ones, and it was kind of influenced basically from Black Panther and Chadwick's legacy, was Simu Liu in Shang-Chi. And the cast and crew have spoken outright about how without Black Panther you wouldn't have Shang-Chi at all, and it's because of the awareness that, or the carefulness that they gave for that movie to make sure it's authentic while still presenting an entertaining story and showing people this new world anyone could that anyone could relate to or want to be a part of. And so with Shang-Chi as well, you get that for the Asian communities, because we don't really have Asian led superhero films. And we only got that just a couple years ago out of Hollywood's history. And it's important to note that it's that film was such a celebration of Chinese culture. So the cinematography, the music, the martial arts, like even though that martial arts is tied to Chinese culture, it's not like this is the draw for people. The draw is like the family aspects, presenting you know uh some an immigrant coming to the states and having to kind of remove himself from the culture that he had back in his home country, and having to adapt with that, and then having to go back to your roots. So I really like how that film really captured the kind of immigrant story in a way where it was still entertaining and people could still relate to, because of that parent child relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Eastern heritage, you know that the family is like the most important part of anything. And films are really starting to progress that more, obviously, with Everything Ever All at Once being as important as it was and as big as it was, is such a big aspect of that, too. Michelle Yeoh, Stephanie Hsu, everyone involved in that movie just did phenomenal explaining that. And especially when it comes to LGBTQ representation as well, is something we see in Everything Ever All at Once with Stephanie Hsu's character having is a gay character and having to have her parents not necessarily be all for it at the beginning, or her family worried about her grandparent finding out and how that affects how the whole family is viewed and the shame it might bring. And so LGBTQ representation is something I want to dive into too, because it was only like less than a decade ago that gay marriage actually became legal. So this is something that is like getting discovered, like not like discovered, but becoming more and more mainstream, which it should have been all along. So it's super important to see stuff like that and stories like that told. I think Bros did a really good job in a comedic way, the one with Billy Eichner and Luke McFarlane this past fall, at showing maybe some of the differences between gays relationships and straight relationships, hetero relationships, because the saying, they really picked on this in the movie, but the saying "love is love" isn't always the truth, and because it's different. And I love that they picked on that, because of course, to me it's important, and I'm sure to so many other LGBTQ students and people around the world, seeing stuff like that is true, because it almost like validates the struggles that we go through and makes us feel like almost we're not alone. So seeing stuff like that on a media means more than anyone could know, and that's why the gaze is important. Because if you look at it from a straight white man's gaze, not all the stuff we're talking about might not be It just might be another movie they watch. It might not mean anything to them. They might go and see Bros and say, hey, that was funny, but it's not like life changing. Or they might go watch Miss Marvel and say, that was cool. I loved watching it, but it didn't like mean that much to me emotionally. But for the different minorities and people around the world who watch this, it does. It means the world, which is why I want to get into why these need to be made, why these films, these projects, these games, these shows, all of this needs to be made. So Emma, I'll shove it to you. What do you think when Hollywood decides they want to make a project about representation? What do you think goes into that?
I think, you know, it's really important to have these stories be told. And hopefully, behind the scenes, what you want for these kind of projects are people that are part of those communities, whether or not they're the actors or the writer. Honestly, the writers are probably one of the most important people behind the scenes that should be involved in this. I like to think of Heartstopper as a really good example of this kind of representation because it's just an amazing show. It's adapted from a series of graphic novels, and it shows kind of, you know, a lot of stories from that are kind of adapted involving people from the LGBTQ community. A lot of them deal with trauma, but this is kind of just like it's a story about these high schoolers going on their journey of discovering themselves, and one of the characters comes out as bisexual, and a lot of it is just so it's a very relatable journey for people who have been through that same process. And but all the creator is queer, the characters, the actors, like a lot of the people behind the scenes, that was a really good example to me of making sure that the right people are in the right room. And I think I think it's just so important to have like authentic, accurate portrayals of people in these communities. It just means the world to people that are watching this and getting to kind of like see yourself in these projects, especially for young people that are struggling with maybe coming out, like anything like that is just so important. So I think it needs to be well rounded behind the scenes and in the show itself.
I completely agree because especially with Heartstopper, it comes across the screen. Like you can tell when people who are actually living these stories in their lives are behind the project because it really does translate well. In Heartstopper, there's just this one specific moment that touched me a lot. It was when Nick is sitting on his bed. Nick is the character has not come out yet. He's sitting in the closet. He's sitting in his bed. He opens up his laptop and Googles, "Am I gay?" And
Literally the like, universal experience.
I remember doing that as an 8-year-old in my
Yep,
room.
yep,
So
exactly.
it's something that I feel like everyone goes through, and it's something that maybe only someone who has gone through it would know. But when you see it, it's just like I feel represented. I feel like my stories are being told, and that's just such a powerful experience. But also something I wanted to get into around LGBTQ that I see sometimes, and it was prominent more in the 2000s. I feel like now we're getting a little bit away from it. Is straight actors portraying gay characters. This is obviously a thing in Brokeback Mountain with Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal. We're seeing it again, actually, later this year with Pedro Pascal and Ethan Hawke in a similar type movie. I don't necessarily hate it, but I feel like it's almost, again, back to the authenticity. It's not always the best. Because obviously, when you see stuff like Heartstopper and both of the main characters are LGBTQ youths, it feels like their acting is better because it seems like things they've gone through before. Whereas, and this is not just for gay characters either, we see it with all over the place. We see Jewish characters who are portrayed by non-Jewish actors. We see it by Muslims, same thing with different religions all over the place. It's not the best thing in the world. Aisha, I'll shove it to you. What do you think about non-authentic actors portraying these minority roles?
It's disrespectful because it's I'm not gonna say it could be better to see someone like in that authentic, like their authentic self, like portraying that role despite someone who's like acting to play that role, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And something that like kind of annoys me with it is a lot of time when we see it, it takes away from like almost giving these people more opportunities. Like
Exactly.
there are so many gay, queer, Muslim, Jewish actors who are struggling to get roles. So when you see a white Christian male get a role as a Jewish character, it can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
It and the ideas behind it are not always great, and that goes into behind the gaze of behind the scenes. I guess, because if you're looking at it from the gaze of maybe the producer of the film or the publisher, like say you're Warner Bros. And you're making a new DC Batman movie or whatever, you want the biggest star. You don't, from that perspective, yeah, you're probably thinking about it because it's becoming more important now and there's more of a call from the public to do it. But like 10 years ago, they're not thinking about representing these characters. If they're making a Moon Knight show 10 years ago, they're not even thinking about including the Jewish heritage. They just want whoever's going to make them the most money at the box office or on the whatever TV show is going to pop the biggest number, which is so terrible. And I'm so glad we're starting to get away from it to actually make art more so than try and make money. Focus on making sure these stories are told because telling these stories are so important. I remember seeing a story around Miss Marvel of seeing a little girl crying watching it just because it's her. Like she sees herself on the screen. And there was another one with the Little Mermaid trailer with the new one with Haley Bailey,
Yeah,
right?
Haley.
Halle Bailey.
Yeah, Haley.
Yeah. As a Little Mermaid, and there was a girl crying because she said she looks like me,
Yeah.
and just like I saw that get made fun of a lot on TikTok, even, which is not good. Like stuff like that will continue because representation means so much to so many people, and it should be respected, and we should be excited that these things exist. But Brandon, I'll show it to you. I'll shove it to you. What do you want to see going forward, for including representation in film and making more of it? Like, what would a general sense of what you would dream to see come forward?
One thing that I want to see is I want to see more creators, more of the creative team behind the scenes of these projects, actually take it seriously. You know, we've seen stories over the past few years of creators of various television shows. You know, there was this whole thing going on over at CBS where there were like these different showrunners who, you know, they would hire you know, one or two minority writers, and but they wouldn't listen to their perspectives when it came to representing those communities. And you know, it's like their goal was just to check a box off and say, okay, we've got our Asian writer, we've got our black writer, we've got a gay writer. But when it came time for that black writer or that gay writer or that Asian writer to say, hey, you know, this actually isn't the way that this character would respond in this situation, or this isn't how this character would behave if this happened to them, or these aren't the foods that they would eat on their dinner table, and things like that. And the showrunners would basically kind of ignore them and just sort of, you know, be like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to do this show the way we want to do it. And to me, I think having those creative teams that care about the authenticity, care about making sure that it's not just enough to put, you know, people of various, you know, backgrounds and stuff on camera. Now we have to actually represent them. Now we have to actually make sure that their stories are being told just as authentically as the stories of the white characters. And I think that until we get to that point, I think we're always going to have issues with representation, because until people actually decide that it's important, then we're going to keep running into the same problems over and over again.
And I completely agree. Just like the good translates across screens, so does the bad. You can tell when people aren't being represented in the writer's room, in the producer box. You can always tell. And some of the stereotypes we see across films are the black characters dying first. And like you mentioned, some of these characters are in these movies to say, oh, we had a black character. We're doing good in this term. And like we see that a lot in horror where the black character is the first to go, and it screams that we wanted to put a black character in this movie. Yeah. We didn't actually care about telling their story or telling black stories. And there's a thing called the Bechdel test too when it comes to feminine portrayal in media, where most women in a lot of movies are there to talk about guys. And it took a while for there to be a lot of stories regarding women talking about women talking about themselves, having their own stories, not just being the damsel in distress for the guy to come save at the end of the movie, or the love interest, the mysterious love interest from across the street. You never know. And so glad we're getting stories like WandaVision, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, like trying to think of more, The Woman King, of stories of these strong women who can be on their own. I think Frozen actually is a really good example of this, because you have the story of two sisters, who are going on this journey, and you think at the end of the movie they're gonna do, oh, true love's kiss. That's how this is all gonna end. That's how it's gonna save. But it actually had nothing to do with men at all. It was just two sisters finding that their true love is each other, and that is so important. And even in the second movie, we see more about the male female love interest, but Elsa as a character is still an independent female. And seeing stuff like that is so important, showing these little girls who are growing up that you don't need a guy to validate you. You don't need a guy to feel important. You can feel important with your own confidence is so important. And seeing stuff like that is a crazy cool. But I was going to point it to you, Ryan. Do you see any other stereotypes that you would like to see fixed in media?
I think one a big one is disabled representation, and with a lot more recently, it's kind of moving in a better direction. But even something as recent as like The Shape of Water, where the main lead, she's a mute character, but the actress who plays her isn't, and she's the actress has been criticized for her bad use of sign language because it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel like that's kind of it doesn't feel like that community is represented well. So I think and then juxtaposing that, like as recently as Creed 3, we have forget I think I forgot the actress's name, but the daughter, she is part of the deaf community, and I like how that film centers kind of has this focus on that aspect where just something as simple as having those special lights in the house when someone rings the doorbell go off. It's not like we have to focus on this. It kind of just happens, and you can kind of can make those connections in your head, like, oh, that's why it's there. Or even just the clear glass floors, because she can't tell if someone's down there. She has to look down. So it's something as simple as that, where it doesn't need to be at the forefront and shove it in your face like this person has a disability. I think as if you include these actual people who have these disabilities, or and kind of have the story just evolve naturally without it being the focus, I think that's a good way to still show off and bring awareness to that community while not feeling like it's we have to do this to grab more people into and show like, hey, look, we're showing off this representation, like stuff like that.
And I completely agree. And seeing more stuff like that almost be like, I don't want to say normalized because it'll never be completely normalized. There will always be bigots in the world. But even like stuff like Knock at the Cabin features a gay couple and their daughter. And it's not the center of the film. Yeah, it's an aspect of the film. And yeah, they explore the stories around it. But the film's about the end of the world. Like, it's not about a gay couple. So it's really nice to see stuff like that be normalized and see gay characters where you might not normally see a hetero couple. So seeing that is so cool, and I think going forward, that's more a direction that I would love to see a little bit more of. Because obviously, seeing these stories that are all out representation, all out, even like Black Panther is a good job of telling another story while also putting so much focus on the Black community and all the stories of African heritage and all that. But seeing a couple of films a year where they're just a normal couple, and you explore the stories and make them accurate, but you don't, and cast them accurate is important too, as we mentioned. But like, have a larger theme play in the film too, I think is a really good way to keep normalizing these films. And I was talking about this in a report a little bit ago. I would love to see there always be a queer or a Black or a minority film in theaters at all times. I don't think we should ever be in a world for the rest of time where there's only white movies, white figure faced focused movies in theaters all at once. That we are past that time. We should never go back to that time. We are in a new world. I'm so glad I'm growing up when I did, because obviously me and Aisha here are both 18, or I'm 19 now, but we all grew up in like different eras. So seeing how even all that impacts our gaze is so interesting. because like for me and Aisha, we've almost always had representation. We were just talking about this before we came on recording.
Yeah.
Tropic Thunder was a movie I had not a lot of idea of. Robert Downey Jr., who's a very prominent actor, Iron Man, he's going to be in Oppenheimer coming out in a couple months, but he blackfaces in that movie and gets nominated an award for it. We were 4 years old. This happened in our lifetime. It almost doesn't sound real to happen in our lifetime, but like this almost like forms of oppression like that existed in our lives. And that's crazy to think about and how far we've come. Looking at a gaze from stuff even in the past. Again, something we were talking about before we came on here is Glee. Glee was like groundbreaking when it came out. Like seeing Chris Colfer portray an openly gay character in high school like that on a national screen was like incredible. I've heard so many interviews of Chris talking about how important it was for him to feel like he was portraying a voice for the voiceless almost in that role. And that's important to see. But if Glee comes out now in today's world, there's a lot of issues with that show. Mercedes Jones, played by Amber Riley, is a very stereotypical black diva in that show. And that's basically all she ever is the entire series. Rachel Berry in that show, played by Leah Michelle, who's problematic in her own right, is a Jewish character. But if you watch the show, maybe outside of like 5 or 6 episodes, you wouldn't know that. They hardly ever dive into it. And when they do, it's very, very stereotypical and not great to see. So, and Artie, who is played by, what's his name?
Kevin McHale.
Kevin McHale. Yeah, it was on my tip of my tongue. But he's like you were talking about, he's a disabled character in that show. In real life, he's an extremely good dancer and he is not disabled at all. So not accurately casting these roles either is very interesting too, because Darren Criss is in that show as well, and he is a straight character, and he's portraying a homosexual character. So seeing not accurate, but like stuff like examples like that of shows that were so prominent and so like revolutionary almost for the representation in today's world will not be acceptable because we have evolved, and seeing that evolution continue in Hollywood is something I don't want to stop. I want to keep getting better and better. I want stuff that comes out today to be like, that wasn't good enough 10 years from now, because our stories, everyone's stories in the world, there shouldn't be a single person on this planet who doesn't have their gaze represented on a film in some way or shape or form. So seeing more of that is just like the ultimate goal. But I wanted to pass around and give closing thoughts on like maybe 1 or 2 things that you want or expect to see in representation going forward. Ryan, I'll start with you.
Oh, I think you just said it best. Where it's we want every type of person on this world to feel represented, and in a positive way, because it's one thing to be represented, it's another to be represented accurately and genuinely by people who are involved in this business. I mean, just to even like, as a Filipino myself, like I don't really feel that completely just yet. Like it's moving in the right direction, but whether it's in front of the camera or even behind the camera, you don't really get to see that so often. So I mean, that's the one thing I hope to do, and that's why even myself, like I started to move in the film industry, because I want to be part of that. I want to make sure that people like me feel represented in film, because this is, everyone is watching this. Everyone, there's this, you are on this stage. So whether it's in front of the camera or behind the camera, I want all types of people to feel accurately and genuinely portrayed.
And Brandon, I'll send it to you with the same question.
Yeah, I think you guys both just hit the nail on the head. I think one of the things that you said in particular, CJ, is that you want for us to say, like, in 10 years that, okay, what we did a decade ago wasn't good enough. Let's make it better. Let's be better about this. And I think that that's so important. I think it's important that we don't get to a point where we're like, okay, we did it. We solved representation. We solved diversity. Okay, we're done now. And I just think we have to continue to push ourselves, and we have to continue to learn about and value voices of people from other communities. We have to continue to make space for those people, and we have to continue to as you were sort of talking about earlier, um, normalize, and I don't like that word, but normalize these characters and these stories by um, as you said, including good themes that show you that these stories are universal, even though yes, they may not look the same as you do, or they may not worship the same God as you, or they may not, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, we have to continue sort of showing these people, telling these stories, and reminding everyone that these stories are valid.
I completely agree. And you guys are so great at talking about that stuff. But I want to translate it to a little bit different. Emma, as a viewer, what are some things you expect from other viewers in terms of representation and calling for representation in the next couple of years?
So yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of problem in a lot of fandoms, just in film community in general, of seeing representation on the screen and just kind of either discounting it or um, thinking it's not a big deal, not understanding why it's important. And, if you're coming at it from, as we're talking about, from like a white male perspective, it may not seem important. But just to kind of open your mind and realize that not every story has to be made for every person. We can all, because the thing is, a lot of us grew up watching solely stories that are about like white men, as an example, and we watch them because that's what's there and we enjoy them, it's entertaining. But I think other viewers need to recognize that there's going to be like there should be a whole wealth of stories in film and shows that kind of run the gambit of just everyone. Like everyone should have their own personal thing to look up to and be like, this is my story that's represented on the screen. Like this is something that's made for me. And I think it just needs to become more of a thing that people are continuing to call for and recognize that it's valuable to have everyone's different backgrounds and stories portrayed on the screen.
Absolutely. And Aisha, I'm going to switch up the question just one more time for you because you, like me, are an aspiring journalism student focusing a little bit in film. So, in that specific industry, and as people who review films and watch them, how would you want that to go? Like, let's say, like the Academy Awards. Like this year, we saw no female directors get nominated for that award for best director, which is absurd for to be in 2022 when a film like The Woman King comes out directed by a female and to not give her even a nod for that. So in terms of like I guess a critic way, how would you like to see representation evolve over the next couple of years?
That's a great question. It's something I've been fighting for myself because there isn't a lot of, like, personally, there isn't a lot of brown critics in the film industry. Like, convincing my parents that I wanted to pursue journalism was a huge step because it's always the stereotypical this. But in regards to, like, in the industry, it's so important to, like, see different representations in, like, movies and having different representations of critics because it's always like you said, the straight white male that's always critiquing the, what am I trying to say, like POC movies, and there isn't like a lot of women critiquing it. There isn't a lot of colored people critiquing it.
You hit the nail on the head with the white straight men should not be reviewing a movie about a POC woman.
Mm.
Like it just should not be happening anymore. There's so many different outlets with so many different talented writers, and there's unlimited talent across various countries. We need to stop giving all the white men all the big spots because there are people who deserve it more and who could review it more accurately and more
Yeah,
and better for the viewer to read. And I completely agree with you on that.
there's
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, a very important conversation to be had. I'm so thankful for all of you for joining me. I'm excited about this. I think it went really well. And if you want to plug any socials or whatever, feel free. Now's your chance. Ryan, I'll start with you.
All right. I am Ryan underscore reflects on Twitter and Letterbox as we're talking about movies. So that's where you can follow me, where I talk about movies, shows, and other pop culture related things.
Brandon, to you.
Yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm at indigo_15 on Twitter, and you'll probably catch me saying something positive.
Yes, Brandon is one of my favorite follows on Twitter. Make sure you go follow him. Just unlimited kindness, and you love to see it. Emma, where can the people find you?
Okay, this always I keep every time I go on one of these Ryan knows like every time I go on something I always reminded myself that I need to change my Twitter username. On Twitter I have _EMMINEM like Eminem the rapper. Yeah. But yeah, follow me there if you can figure out how to type in my username. I'm always tweeting about pop culture and probably Matt Murdock and things like that. And then Letterboxd, I have an easier username. It's just Emma Jacqueline. JACLYN.
Yes. Go follow Emma if you want to see a viral tweet about Ted Lasso at 9 p.m. at night.
Yeah,
It's your
literally.
favorite thing.
One of my tweets goes viral like every couple weeks, so
I'm the Vincent
take that for what it's worth.
And Aisha, where can the people find you?
I'm Evans Larsons on Twitter, like Chris Evans and then Free Larson with an S at the end. I'm always talking Marvel. Currently freaking out over the Marvels. Eventually ghosted next week.
Next week.
Next week. Yeah, and hopefully I get more like after this conversation, like maybe talking more about representation in like the South Asian aspect and all that stuff. I'm also, if we're all shouting out letterbox, might as well. My letterbox is my full name, just smushed together. It's Aisha Shabish. Just smushed all together. And yeah, I haven't been on it, but hopefully I go back.
Yes, definitely go follow all these awesome people. They're always tweeting out great things. And I'm so excited y'all joined me today. And for the viewers, I hope you take something from this conversation. Maybe start watching some more representation films to better gain your knowledge, maybe promoting them more, maybe going to see them in theaters to help tell Hollywood that we want more. Use your voice, use your money, because that's what speaks in Hollywood, unfortunately. But doing all these efforts to make sure that representation does never stops, because it never should. And I thank you all for listening. This has been awesome.